Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferny, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we dive back into the city of 1,000 tongues, brought to you by our new patron, Ewan. But before we get into that, remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on YouTube, where you can go ahead and click subscribe, like, share. I don't know, dig? Is dig still a thing? I'll put dig in there, I guess. Why not? And you can go do all that stuff that feeds the algorithms to our new robot masters. We're also on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. And if you want to talk to us more directly, you can come and join our Discord, where we can chat occasionally about stuff, world building, not world building, all that good stuff. And if you're feeling particularly generous, like our patron Ewan, you can always go to our Patreon and donate to us there, where you'll get access to patron-only goodies like the Aphid Lounge, a monthly-ish patron-only podcast. Let's see, we've got a patron-only Discord section in the Discord if you want to come and chat with us more directly there. And we also have Too Hot for Broadcast, which is just the stuff that gets kept on the cutting room floor for, myriad reasons. But with all of that out the way, we get to dive right back into our city of 1,000 tongues. Last we left off, our twist was reverse the roles of the heroes and villains. But this is the second part of a two-part series. If you have not listened to that first part yet, by all means, please go listen to that first, because otherwise, it's going to be pretty confusing. Anyway, let's see. Who haven't we heard from in a while? Who hasn't kicked us off? Daniel, I feel like you haven't kicked us off in a while, so why don't you tell us, how did you reconcile the twist of reversing the roles of heroes and villains?
And this is rather vague, but my first thought was the being underground who was creating the weird mold stuff. I don't remember exactly his context. He seemed rather ominous and cult-like, and I think he was the one who had a bunch of undead-ish friends with tongues, right?
I guess we never established if he had a lot of. You're talking about like the one that's writing the poetry.
Yeah,
that was Courtney's mad god, right?
Yeah, that was
the mad one.
I actually hadn't pictured him as having like much of an undead following. Like he's more of a lone figure. But what did you have in mind?
Who has the undead guys?
I think we established that was like a way that you can cast magic in some way, or like some ways that you could reveal or understand the secrets within Palimpsest.
Oh, I thought that we had some figure that was controlling people who cut their tongues out.
We talked about that. That's like another form of quote unquote godhood, is you have all these like thralls basically, and you have their tongues that you can swap out whenever you need to.
Okay.
Right. That was kind of the power set that we were looking at. Yeah.
So my thought was that whoever is principally doing this, instead of them, because it just seems very evil, instead of them being bad, they would probably be trying to accomplish something that's good. So, and not in the Jedi are evil kind of sense, but that there's something like seriously bad happening to the city, and it's a matter of performing all these things in order to get to the bottom of it.
Gotcha.
So like, it might seem ominous, but they're maybe the dead are willing, right? And so that's part of it, and on the surface it seems like this evil cult thing, but really this person is trying to get closer to a secret. And maybe the city, the people above, are the ones that are bad because they're trying to keep it under wraps. And there's another, maybe it has to do with another fall of the city happening.
I am so certain that if we lined up all the times that we have said, in my opinion, it's the Jedi who are evil, it would probably rival our mention of the 1999 Brendan Fraser classic, The Mummy, like in terms of how often we reference that particular thing. So yeah. So that's a cool inversion, Daniel. And when you say that, I can't help but feel like I'm going to hit you with an Uno reversed card, because my reconciliation also has to do with the kind of nature of the secrets within Palimpsest. I was kind of interested because Palimpsest doesn't necessarily have a morality to it necessarily. We didn't really establish like heroes and villains. So I was taking this more as a figurative kind of heroes and villains get switched, which is like basically I want to see an inversion in something, right? So rather than the secrets of the city kind of revealing something and that, like you're uncovering something within the truth, I wanted to kind of invert that and say like the closer you are to getting to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. Like the more knowledge you have, the worse it becomes for everyone around you. So rather than like the kind of summoning circle is there, like the city's built on the summoning circle to summon something, I had in mind that effectively the city and everything that's built on the ley line is there to contain something instead. So yeah, I don't know. I had some interesting thoughts about that, but yeah, that's what I got from my reconciliation.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like mine kind of works with both of yours. Mine's also on the more vague side because, yeah, like you said, we hadn't really established good or bad sides last time. But yeah, one of the things we did establish was that something happens every however many years or generations where the city is partially leveled or collapses or sinks. And that ties in with the summoning circle potentially. So I'm thinking that like the hero villain dynamic revolves around that somehow, like the leveling process is actually some secret group or entity that's trying to prevent that summoning from happening fully. And depending on how we want to see that, like the heroes and villains in this scenario, we could have the summoning be a bad thing and the levelers could be good, or that could be flipped where the summoning would ultimately be a good thing and this group or entity is preventing it for a bad or selfish reason.
Forgot about the summoning stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the like base of the city. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a major component. Yeah.
Kind of a big deal. That would be a good one to make be a good thing, like whatever is trapped there, because that would encapsulate your containment suggestion. Like, so perhaps like it being freed is good, and it's always been contained, and it's being contained is what levels the city. Like there's quakes and stuff that come out because it's contained.
Sure. So you're suggesting that the city is like imprisoning this thing. So it's not a summoning circle. It's a contained. So yeah, that directly works with kind of what I was getting at, which is
reverse.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Where it's like where it's a containment rather than a summoning.
Right. Everyone's misunderstood it.
Right. Because what happens when the containment breaks is that it starts to come out, and maybe that's what like starts to level the city in some way. Right. And in doing so, people lose their shit and they're like, oh no, something is being summoned from this magical thing. And in reality, it's like, nah, we're keeping this thing locked up. Although, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting concept. And then there's a bunch of different ways that I kind of want to run with it. But I'll shut up for a little bit and let you guys kind of bring in here.
Yeah, what I was saying was that like that leveling process was in opposition to the summoning or release in this case. So like since it's a prison now, I don't know if it's some group that's like performing some ceremony that collapses the city to reinforce the boundaries of this prison, maybe. So it's not just like the creature or whatever it is shaking the ground and causing earthquakes. It's like a group actively doing that on purpose, but their reasoning is ultimately to like keep everybody safe and from completely dying.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, maybe it's a kind of thing where it's like, hey, we need to break the foundations to build it back stronger because over time the containment weakens. And so in order for them to restore it, they need to rebuild it from scratch effectively, right?
Interesting. Yeah, or like reinforce it with all the foundations that are built on top of it.
Right. There's in Magic the Gathering, in Ravnica specifically, there is a red-green clan called the Gruul clan, and they live in a giant city, but they're all about like nature reclaiming stuff. And so their job or their part in the ecosystem that is Ravnica is, hey, we're here to like break shit and like tear down buildings and tear down like worked stone and let nature reclaim it. And so their territory is like constantly shifting in a way as it kind of like snakes through various parts of the city. And then other guilds will come in and reclaim the parts that, kind of get taken over as well. And I feel like that's an apt comparison to what we're trying to do here, where as an act of restoration, a natural restoration, like that's what your cultish or group is trying to do here, Courtney,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that could work.
How does this jive with the monster or whatever's under there?
So Courtney was suggesting that they are destroying parts of the city in order to keep this thing contained. Is that correct, Courtney?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's basically something about like the leveling process reinforces the containment. Yeah.
So deliberately her damaging the city then every time.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, to everybody else who doesn't know the secret, it seems kind of shitty.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like inverse. So it's not so much that it's quaking; it's that they're keeping it contained by like putting more stuff on top of it, basically.
Yeah.
What I find to be rather interesting about that idea as well, Courtney, is the fact that is like a conspiracy on a fairly vast level.
Yeah.
Like, imagine like the level of like, listen, this is for the city's own good, and this is like the level of mass destruction that we have to plan out in order for this to happen, and like do it by like block by block in some cases, right?
Yeah. And like I imagine since they are planning it, like they can also, there's probably some form of government that's like getting things in order and telling people to prepare and, get your stuff together, go to these like safe areas, etc. But they just are keeping it secret that that's the reason why it's happening.
Yeah. And they can blame it on multiple things like, oh, it was a molasses flood, or oh, it was an earthquake, or oh, it was a massive fire that happened, or there's all sorts of things that they can blame it on, but it's all state sanctioned effectively as well. That's kind of a cool concept to run with too, I think.
Yeah, I think it all works well with what we talked about last time, how it sounded like certain slime molds were like dying off, and we had talked a bunch about like potentially one of the slime molds being very important for like reconstruction and architecture and structure and all that. And so if that's not there anymore, when this happens next, the city's going to be very fucked.
Yeah, that's an interesting little twist that we kind of have to work, because now they're starting to panic. It's like, well, now we can't level the city as often as we used to. And so maybe to the rest of the citizenry, it's like, oh, the city is safer than it's ever been. But in reality, it's kind of like barely holding on. There's like a crumbling nature to society that's happening because of this.
Yeah, I feel like it'll be up to this secret group to like make a choice. Like, do we go through with the leveling even though we're not going to be able to rebuild as effectively, or do we take a risk and keep waiting to see how long we can push it?
Yeah. And then I think in the last episode, we also established that your mad god was kind of behind or discovered the mold that was the cause of this kind of mold blight. Is that right, Courtney?
Yeah, I think like somewhere down in the deeper levels where he's like writing his poetry, there's a door that I've been envisioning it as like an accidental opening or accidental discovery that he sort of unlocked, and that led to this blight. Or maybe it even like worked its way through his like long ongoing epic poem that stretches across the city.
Right.
So that's how it like spread around.
Okay.
This mold eats the other molds, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it carnivorous in some way?
Right.
And so we never really defined a monster, quote unquote. So like, is it the same one and the same, or are they pouring parts of the city on top of it so that it'll eat that instead of the current level, or is it that there's a separate monster and this mold is somehow connected to it?
So what I'm hearing you say, Daniel, is are you suggesting that we've got like a massive mold monster that is partly responsible for this carnivorous mold?
Oh yeah, maybe it is that like it just is like it's spread out,
Yeah.
And so every time they level it, they feed it more material so they can
interesting.
do that, So it's not like evil; it's just a creature,
right? And I want to make sure that we also remember that the molds themselves are like currency as well,
right? So maybe they're like lesser molds from it that are not as viral or something that they use.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're it's not just currency, but it's also magic, I believe, right? Is that true?
Oh yeah, we talked about like there would just be a lot of uses for it. There's the structure stuff, the source of magic potentially,
currency, and then there was like God's ink or living ink.
Living
right?
ink was the most valuable one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm glad that I'm remembering all of this live on air. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, one other thing actually. So like last time we talked about, we were like half joking about my lack of blood in the setting. And then I was thinking like, oh, maybe the Mad God's ink mold is his own blood. So like if that's been part of the source of the contamination that's now around the city, like he himself is probably contaminated now too. If it's like gotten into his own blood, if he's been using that to write on the walls, you know.
I reject your notion that we were half joking, Courtney. I was deadly serious. Like that. When I see an opportunity for blood, I'm just assuming that you're going to take it. So, do with that what you will. Yeah.
So you're saying like he's infected by the mold, basically.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking now. But like I don't know what that means for him as a figure. Like I said last time, I didn't really have anything super specific in mind as far as like what he is, other than this person who's just been wandering around for years and years and years. So I don't know if like it being inside of him now makes him a more active villain, or if he is just kind of still roaming and writing, but the writing has changed somehow.
We can speak to what the effects of the mold are. We know that it consumes raw materials, right? Because the leveling studies to feed it. But what does it have a different effect on living material?
I was also thinking along the same lines that like, why can't we have this mad god now be like a creature who, or a god who is struggling to fight the corruption that is the mold itself, right? Like if the living ink, or if the god's blood is corrupted within its system, I can't help but think that the poetry will reflect, and maybe this is where they get the reputation, is that this thing is constantly corrupting this god, and the god is perhaps constantly regenerating to a certain extent. And so their poetry comes across as mad as a result. But in reality, they struggle between being the voice of the mold and a living god amongst Palimpsest.
I mean, that's interesting. Yeah.
In the spirit of the twist, it may be that it's not so much a corruption, but that if the mold is eating bits of the city as it's poured on top of it, it's literally consuming the history of the city. And so it could be that the mold in his body, like you were saying, is a voice for the creature and a voice for the history of the city, which he expresses in the epic poem. So he's literally like outpouring what's been consumed over time. And it seems mad because it's a collection of all these histories,
Shit, Daniel, that's super fucking cool. Yeah.
And so he's not really a villain so much as he's just freaky,
Yeah. I also like that implies that like he's been corrupted for a very long time.
Yeah,
like this has been going on for a very long, brewing and underneath the city, and it's only recently that it's like come to the surface and is starting to eat away. Because last time we talked about like this ancient mold that like basically erases the stuff that's been written, or like erases the existing molds. So I'm curious like what that means for all the writing that he's done so far.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that as well, right? Like we don't know how long the denigration of the molds has been happening for. So maybe this has been like a long time. It's like, oh wow, this stuff used to be way more plentiful. And now only recently have they been like, okay, we should maybe start being concerned. And that was like 20 years ago, kind of like another thing that is directly on the horizon for us as well. Something that we were joking about actually pre-recording. So
funny how that works.
I mean, you can view that. So like we said that the mold erases like the effacings of the other molds. It could be that like when you mix the stuff together into this primal mold, it becomes like a soup, right? And it seems to anyone else like, oh, you've destroyed our individuated molds because it's been merged into this one. So it could be that from the perspective of the people who it's being invasive towards, it's destroying their molds What it's really doing is it's merging them all together, because we know that the poet
Ooh.
expresses it, as one thing.
The merging is a new twist that I really appreciate.
Like Borgish, because if you're the Federation and the Borg are attacking you, from your perspective, they're destroying your culture and ravaging your worlds and all that. The perspective of the Borg, they're merging you into their one collective mind, which is a rich soup of all of these worlds.
They're unifying you,
right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm fucking down with that. That sounds dope.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. So I would say that we've reconciled the twist and then some. So now I suppose we have to get into our factions. Does anyone have a strong inclination as to where they want to start?
Mine's pretty mundane.
Okay, let's hear it. What do you got?
All right. So yeah, given all the grave robbing and the tongue removals and probably murder and just general grimy vibes of the city, I wanted to introduce a faction of independent investigators and detectives.
Okay.
So like not connected to any official government faction. They're probably a small group, very scrappy, taking on small jobs for people who are looking for missing family or friends, or who want to figure out where their buried loved one's body went, stuff like that. So like nothing fancy really, but I do feel like they could get involved in whatever we end up doing for the main quest on this one.
Can I just remark upon something that I don't think we've really touched on yet? I feel like this city is riddled with secrets because like it wants to be, right? And the idea that you're creating, like an organization of private detectives effectively speaks to the necessity of them, where maybe it's one of those things where it's the smallest things that go missing, whether it be like a wedding ring or an item or even like a person, not just a person, not just a thing, but also like a memory, or like maybe it's like a feeling or something like that, and they have to recover those things. It's like, oh man, like I lost my grandma's recipe. It's like, oh, where was it written down? I'm like, it wasn't. It was in my head, and now like now it's out there, and I need to retrieve it, like that kind of thing. I feel like that is something that we can look to in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, I like the small items too being lost, especially with like the nature of the city and how it is leveled and erased and written over. Like stuff falls through the cracks really easily.
Exactly. Like it's a city of constant change, and moving, I would imagine, is also fairly constant, or relatively speaking anyway. Like there's probably big migration patterns that happen, sociologically speaking, and as a result of the kind of breaking and rebuilding of the city.
Yeah.
By the way, I think that this is just generally good world building or good setting building. I would urge people to see cities in urban spaces as organisms rather than like static things, because cities are very, very much alive. Like you can look at their growth, decay, and rebirth in so many interesting ways if you just take a look at how history works and how it grows and changes. I'm a big fan of that, as you know, but I'm gonna stop there because I could go on forever about the history of cities and like rebuilding and stuff like that. So I would urge you to look at it like an organism rather than a static thing. That's all I'll say.
No, I totally agree. And like, I know even just the concept of approaching a setting, or in this case, a city, of like, why would people be here in the first place? What brought them here? What kept them here? What brought other people here? How did those groups intermingle over time? Rather than just starting as like, oh yeah, I just want a city over here, and we're going to fast forward 1,000 years and it looks like this, without really thinking about the history of it. Which I guess brings us to a question of like, why did people build here in the first place if there's this horrible mold creature underneath it?
Well, I think based on the fact that it's now a form of containment, I would imagine that that's probably where it started, right? It started out of a need to contain, and mind you, it might not be a mold creature. It might be something that is so old and ancient that it's just so happened to have gone moldy at some point during its lifetime, right?
What if this is like a dying Earth kind of setting where we're way in the future of like a Earth-like planet that collapsed. Like, they had a lot of technology. What if this is basically on top of a CDC or like biological containment lab area, or like a biological weapons development center, something like that, but like thousands and thousands of years removed.
Sure. Or like maybe it's like the seed vault or something like that,
Right.
If we wanted to make it less malevolent,
Right.
Maybe the straightforward answer, which could be solved by any of these things, is that it served as a resource when there were no other resources. So if it was a CDC lab or a seed vault at some point, and either it became corrupted or became a site of whatever disaster, and the rest of the world is pretty much trash, I can see settlers arriving here and finding useful molds to build things with, and they just start creating a civilization with it, not knowing what's there.
You could also, I mean, if it grows from a seed vault, then I think that there's a natural history that you can, kind of derive from that, where, oh, wow, there's all this bountiful, plentiful, like plant life over here.
Right.
And then as they build upon that land and they kind of stymie the growth of it, it becomes moldy because it becomes trapped within the vault itself. And as a result of urbanization, it literally molds over in some way, I'm sure that that's not how plants necessarily work, but come on, guys, like give me a break here.
It's fantasy. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I like that. And I do like the visual that like there are probably parts of the city that are like big greenhouses or something where they have kept the original plants as food sources. So it's like I had been picturing it as, like I said, this kind of grimy, gross city, like grim and dark and everything. But I feel like there are probably some really lush portions that are basically like farmland but vertically constructed or something.
I love the aesthetic that comes with that as well, because much like you, I also had this idea of like it is very city, as in like very stone, very urban in that way. But the idea that we now have whole districts perhaps that are, hey, this is the agriculture district. Why is that? It's because plants are growing in and out of the buildings that are there now, So yeah, I think aesthetically that really works. I think that's really cool. Plus we can have, I hate to bring up Boss Log once again, not really, but like, you can have like entire districts that are also greenhouses because they need to be. Yeah.
Can we go back and summarize your faction though? Because I feel like we've gone far afield from it.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, they were kind of like I didn't flesh them out too much. But yeah, basically just a small group of independent detectives and investigators and private eye kind of things. Not related to the government or any larger faction. And they take on small jobs of finding people, finding things, whatever.
Yeah, that idea really spiraled there, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
I remember that, but I'm like, well, we're far away from it. Is there anything, just since we have a sense more of the world now and that it's semi-dying Earth, so I'm picturing something like ultraviolet grasslands or what's the artist that we like to play with for Massive Ruin?
Mobius.
Like a Mobius kind of feel. I'm seeing something wacky because that means like what visually do you see your faction looking at? Because now I'm also thinking, what's that indie RPG that's super weird? Troika, I think.
There's a couple of them now. Yeah.
Like because Troika has weird classes or jobs, right? I think is that the one?
I haven't looked at like the classes or anything.
Is Troika the one that has
bizarre jobs?
Yeah, no, there's another one that I'm thinking of. It might not be Troika, but it's like, oh, you're like a dog with like a voice box or something like that.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Is it the jobs one? Let me see. RPG. This will lead into my question for you. I'm trying to see. Cosmopolitan group of travelers. And oh my god, their website. What the hell's happening in here? It's nice, but
I'm also similarly on there too.
Yeah,
I know, I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, it's the one with the 36. It's lots of backgrounds. It's mostly just crazy backgrounds.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, is your faction wacky since they're looking for weird stuff? Like, what's their character?
Yeah, like when I initially thought of them, I pictured them as like kind of the typical noir detective type. But like after talking about the city more, I'm thinking that they're probably a little odd and like probably pulling in a lot of things that they find along the way. Like I imagine too that they get hired for certain jobs, but then like the people who hired them move or disappear, so they just end up with stuff. So they
that's
could
really
be,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, so they could be like very like scavengery and like almost like hoarding a lot of stuff to
Yeah.
use in their investigations or like their delves deeper into the city.
It sounds like they're half detective, half merchant, right? Like, hey, I found this thing, but my employer moved. Do you want it? I can sell it to you, like that kind of thing happens.
I'm almost picturing like they're more inclined to like hoard it just in case that person comes back kind of thing. Like if they've been, partially paid for the job already, it's like, well, we might as well hold on to it in case this person
Right.
comes back in a week. And then they just end up with all this stuff. And then they use that stuff to like figure out other things, to build other mechanical things or something.
And that is, of course, entirely dependent on the morality of the individual, I would imagine, right? Like, it's like some of them are like, my client bounced on me. Do you want it? I'll sell it to you at a good price, like that kind of thing. Yeah, that's fun. I like that a lot. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, shit. Okay. Honestly, I think that the reason that we've spiraled as much and we're asking so many questions is in large part due to the richness of the world that we've created.
Yeah.
I am excited to explore this world even further, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Daniel, why don't you continue this exploration for us with your faction? What have you got for us, Daniel?
The ones I were thinking about are probably similar to these collectors, but I think more scientific. And it goes back to what I had mentioned, I think, in the first episode about a type of scientist who studies the rings of trees to understand what happened, over time. So these are like this, but they study the devastation of the city, like along its fault lines, and they're trying to trace its history through the devastation.
Sure.
So kind of like some sort of, I don't know, if the tree ring people are called dendrologists, which is what the science is, they'd be something having to do with like urbanologists or something. So they follow a sort of science they've developed that is based on the levelings that have happened, and it reveals to them the true history of the city.
Interesting. So our factions are effectively at odds here, Daniel. I have to say. So you're more interested in learning the history of the city through examining its roots and trunk, basically, right? Okay. Which actually, the more that we think about this, the fact that it's built on a seed vault makes that idea even more whimsical to me, huh? Yeah. So in stark contrast to Daniel, and I think that we've created like a nice spectrum of factions here, because I wanted to talk about the people who keep secrets, because a city that is full of secrets, especially if they're filled with secret seekers, then there has to be a faction or a group who are deliberately trying to obscure or obfuscate the truth in some way. In other like bigger worlds, it might be seen as an Illuminati group, but I was mostly interested in the idea of sealing up parts of the city again to hide the history of the city, to obscure what the city was actually built for and built upon. So I think in terms of you and I, Daniel, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here, and I really love that, actually.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because we were talking about this larger conspiracy, right? That's about containing this creature, and I assume they have a large part to do with that.
Look, someone's got to seal the doors of a forbidden tomb, and my guys are there to do it,
Seems like they fucked up when my mad god somehow stumbled into it.
I mean,
where is he aligned? That's a good question on that.
I would say unaligned, personally.
Yeah, probably opposed because he's a liability to them then. I mean, I can see a party forming here. I can see you have the people who collect lost things, right? You have this sort of, whatever we're going to call the urbanologist or something, that's searching for some answers. I could see them going to the collectors to find certain places or things to get closer to research. And then I could see the mad god revealing something accidentally by them encountering it, and then the secrets faction being the antagonists in this case, or even being a plant in their group, who's trying to misdirect them on purpose. We have like the person who's the active force in the narrative searching for something. You've got the facilitator. You've got the friction against that, all of those together.
Yeah, I really like that. And I actually hadn't thought about my detective collectors being like also looking for places, but that also makes sense in the grand scheme of things. And I like that connection with your urbanologists a lot.
I mean, it could be too, like, say the urbanologist has an object that's a piece of an object that he knows belongs to some part of a city, and he'd say, "Can you find me more of this?" And that the finder probably knows where to find it, and so that helps them then glean more about the history of the city.
Yeah. Did you picture your urbanologists as having like a central library collection, or are they more traveling?
Probably, I would say to make them different than yours, they probably do have a central like academic place, and they probably are very formal and nerdy and like methodical, right? And so they're an established thing,
Yeah. Versus Rob, I'm guessing that your secret keepers are more nomadic.
So it's interesting you should say that, because very much also in the opposite of Daniel, like I imagine that the group that I was focusing on was not like the scheming, like methodical one. It's more like, hey, we're paid to like go and, seal up places. It's more blue collar than like an academic sense. Like this is more the arm that like goes and does the will of the council rather than the council itself.
I gotcha.
So they're more like custodians of secrets than anything else, right? They're like, all right, somebody cracked open the vault. We got to go reseal it. We got to go like maybe set up some traps next time, or like it's a very kind of like journeyman type thing, or a very craftsman style of secret keeper. I'm thinking of.
I gotcha. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when you think Illuminati, you do think like shadowy council of like secret nerds hiding behind masks and shadows. Like, I like the idea of like, we've got a job to do. I've got to go take a hammer and like knock over this thing to make sure that no one else can get in it. Like that to me is far more interesting and fun. But yeah.
It makes me think of I forget what setting it even was. It was something with dwarves. It might have been like, was it Land of a Thousand Doors? I forget, but it was they were erasing stuff and like would use alchemical solutions to like wipe away murals and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I'm kind of seeing your guys as similar, but like more blue collar, more like just got a job to do.
Yes.
But I could also see them using like solutions and potions and caustic things to like scrub away at even like the molds that are growing there.
And at the same time, they're still like, like I say that they're blue collar, but they still have secrets of their own and know the city better than most people,
What happens if somebody takes one of their tongues?
Oh,
do they learn those secrets?
That's a great question. A question that I have never even considered. So question about, I suppose we can talk about that a little bit more, right? Like, is consent necessary for this particular thing? Like, maybe you have to convince the folks, you have to convince the dead that because you can't just enslave them, right? There's ethical quandaries involved with that. I'm imagining that it might be more interesting if you have to convince the people to give up the goat, so to speak.
Did we say something about needing to be able to speak the language?
Yeah.
Or that it gives
this? Yeah, or it was like the ones that take the tongues get the language. And then they end up with this like kind of group of thralls behind them that they don't have tongues anymore, or they can like swap out the tongues to their god figure. Yeah.
And the question of consent, I'm not sure, because I think a more villainous being wouldn't get their consent, or would bypass that somehow.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder if there's like a villain that we haven't developed yet who is one of these god entities who does take tongues without people's consent, and like maybe he's kind of a boogeyman kind of figure.
Oh yeah, that's fun. I like that. Yeah.
Well, the other reason why I question is because if there is a question of consent for the dead, you now are introducing a layer of the supernatural that involves like the afterlife, right? Which is totally viable. But the question is like, if this is a dying earth setting, to what degree are we getting into like, gods and true supernatural power and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, remember that we had gods as a kind of important thing to begin with, even though they're not actually gods, they're just secret holders, right?
That's what I mean. Like, they're not truly supernatural beings, not really gods.
Sure. But I like to keep the idea in mind that, like they're gods to them, like I have no problem with something like that,
I mean, maybe I could see, for example, as someone who's dead, perhaps we can tie it to the mold, and that their brains maybe are animated by the mold network in some degree. So there's like a flicker of consciousness, and maybe it's not so much forcing them to agree with you, but interfacing with them that becomes difficult. So like if you just kind of tongue out, you don't know what you're doing, you could just lose it and it'll dissolve, right?
Yeah.
And that's interpreted by the people as some kind of mystical thing.
Yeah, I could see that. Because I think last time you had brought up that like slime molds, the structure is like akin to a neural network or something of them. So that would make sense. Yeah.
Because then I could see two interpretations. I could see, for example, the secret sorts of people seeing this as a mystical, esoteric kind of process. And then the sciencey types, the academic ones, understand that it's a neural network and they view it as a more material thing. So now it's a question of like what's true and nobody really knows, which is I think at the heart of a lot of dying earth settings where they might encounter some sort of technology and it seems divine, but then like especially in the one that I love, which I've mentioned a few times, the Book of the Long Sun, like even when you realize as a reader that it's technology, the book still presents it to you in a sort of divine way. So you feel like there's something magical about it, even though this is a nuclear missile that they're encountering. Right. So like that, will you be able to have both of those if it's played from two perspectives, when you're going through the narrative?
I love this, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm just like, damn, this is so much. I'm having so much fucking fun right now. Yeah, I love building worlds with y'all. That's what I'll say about that. So I mean, I think honestly, we could go forever. Or at least 4 years, right? Like we could do this for at least another 4 years, is my guess. But I think now is a good time for us to stop and take a look into a main storyline quest. And for this, I actually have an interesting plot point to start with. Courtney, your faction is literally the best point to start with an underdog. It is the best point to start a secret. Like it's the simplest, easiest hook in the world. Hey, I've got a job to go find this thing. And then immediately things become more complicated from there. You start to uncover all these secrets, and all of a sudden our other factions get involved. I mean, come on, it's right there. So I'm going to suggest that we start there unless someone else wants to stop me.
No, I think that works. Although it's also, I mean, I feel like it works with my faction too, but the idea of that like new villain that I brought up, the like tongue stealer, serial killer type, like maybe that's kind of the main focus of this quest, is finding out who that is and stopping them. Like one of my detectives was contacted by somebody who's like family member had like their tongue ripped out or something like that.
Oh, living family member. Yeah. We have not considered that until now. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then like that starts them down this path of trying to figure out what's going on. And then in that process, they get linked up to people from your factions as this investigation goes on.
I think that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, we should flesh it out a little bit more, but I agree. That is cool as shit. What do we want to add to it? What do we want to bring into this that we can make even cooler?
Well, so just to understand the relationship of the tongue. So the collection of tongues by this person, we know the tongues contain secrets of the past of the city, right? Essentially what they let us do. And they let you speak to and control the old in some capacity.
Yeah, something having to do with the mold and speaking languages and all that.
Okay, so in terms of the motivations of this person, they must be wanting to control mold then, right?
Oh, maybe they're seeking out like the center of the labyrinth of the catacombs to try to unleash the mold, whatever that's in there.
Okay, so maybe they have some sort of destructive intent, whether it's an insane destructive intent or some reason to unlock danger, is what we're saying.
Yeah, maybe they seek to control it, or they think they can control it if they accrue enough power and do something with it.
Could they be a dendrologist gone evil?
Ooh, evil tree scientist.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that much.
Oh,
I like that. Yeah.
I mean, we could also go full MacGuffin with it as well and have it be tied to an object that they need to find. And it's like a map or maybe a compass in some way that is particularly valuable. And the people who have it don't know how valuable that thing is, you know?
And maybe this is there's a node within the city that is a neural kind of center, right, of the mold network, and they're seeking that, which sort of functions as a compass to the rest of the underground. I could also see in this case, because we've made the dendrologist the villain in this case, you can have one on your party who's good, but you can also have a secrets person who has aligned with them for the sake of keeping this from happening.
Sure, because they both recognize, look, this shit's bad. We got to make sure that this doesn't happen. You know, but at the same time, you can also make it so there's a constant back and forth where it's like, don't steal shit, don't take shit. You're giving me more work to do. Cut it out.
Exactly.
You know, like,
and so it's like the scientist of the party is like excited to learn all these things, but then the secrets person is also kind of esoteric about stuff. So it's like, when they talk to each other, I imagine they have like either both a lot of friction, but also like revelations between the two of them.
Sure.
They can both teach each other things about it, that they didn't realize.
I would also imagine that like the reveal of them being a custodian is also not immediate as well.
Exactly.
You know? It's definitely like partway through, and you could even play them off as like a himbo or kind of like a bumbling brute for a little bit, where it's like, whoops, didn't mean to knock that over. Whoops, didn't mean to destroy that. Like that's an easy one to do too.
Maybe you could even have it be that the secrets person, knowing that this dendrologist has gone crazy, is the one to go seek out the collector people to get help.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And the collector people are like, well, we need to hire this dendrologist because they know how to navigate this labyrinth or something. And so they bring that one on board. And now the secrets person is under a lot of pressure to keep it secret because his buddies all got murdered by this person and he's on his own now or something,
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, that's fun.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
I am picturing the custodian guy as like a old, like, I'm too old for this shit, Mike Ehrmantraut kind of character.
I see. To me, he's definitely less Mike Ehrmantraut because that character is just a bit too serious for me. Like I find him to be a little bit more like jovial in my brain. But you know what? We can have our own headcanons, Courtney. That's totally fine. Yeah, but that's fun. Okay. What do we want to do? What makes this like unique and interesting and different for this particular quest? I feel like we're missing a key component here. You know what? Screw it. Yeah, let's do a twist. I think that'd be fun. Our twist for this main storyline is okay. I want to hear y'all explain how we can throw in a dance party. Parentheses, Daniel Quinn is to blame. So how are we throwing a dance party into this one?
I might have an idea. So, I forget when it happened. Was it like medieval times or Dark Ages or something? And there was that like dancing plague.
Dance to the Dead. Yeah.
The dancing plague thing. I'm wondering if like that is happening in part of the city due to some molds or something, or maybe it's related to this tongue thief person or something.
You could either have a dance macabre or you can have like this kind of like dancing plague. Either one works, but yeah, damn, that's really cool, Courtney. Like great way to subvert that.
And creepy too,
Yeah.
I mean, both are acceptable. What do you think is more appropriate to the quest that we have currently?
What do you mean by dance macabre?
Oh, like when people during the Black Plague, people would just dance following like plague doctors or the plague itself because they just were dead. So who fucking cares?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, we'll stick with the dancing plague. I think it makes more sense with the mold, I think, you know.
I could also see, like, I don't know if it would be the tongue thief or somebody, like, attracting a thrall of, like we talked about last time, the god thrall things usually, like, could sing or, like, have some sort of choir aspect to them. But maybe this one is, like, dancing instead.
So the dendrologist is creating a massive dance party of the undead to like finally like pull off some massive ritual is what you're saying here.
Maybe. I don't know. Daniel, help.
I mean,
Daniel, you're directly responsible for this twist. So tell us what's up.
When you said dance party, my first thought, of course, was sort of what's that? They have a popular series now. It was a video game and involved mushroom people.
Last of Us.
Yeah, so it makes you think of like an infection causing the dance, obviously, because it's like brain rotting, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it could be, but maybe it's like there's a couple ways. I mean, one, it could be like some creepy thing you encounter when you're down there searching for the thing because it's people who have been collected by this killer or whatever that are now his thralls. I could also see like this being a black market sort of side effect where in the investigation, people have extracted some of the mold that has been used by the killer. Maybe he's using this to get his victims, and it creates this sort of rave situation underground where people are ingesting it deliberately, and then they end up dancing till they die sort of situation, and that's how he gets people. So it could, if you want to take it in a weird noir kind of, like TechnoFrance sort of situation, you could go that direction too. I'm thinking like we watched the movie. You know what I mean? What was it? The
As Above, So Below.
Yeah, they had the whole French. We're in this French dance club kind of thing. I'm thinking like that. Yeah,
Daniel, when you say TechnoFrance, you just mean France. So yeah.
I was also thinking when you're talking of like maybe it's something with since this tongue thief person is like stealing the tongues of potentially still living people. What if like in doing so he's leaving behind a slime mold that gets into their system that makes them do this dance until they die potentially?
Yeah. Oh, it's a new strain of the kind of predator, the predator.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
I feel like that's connected to the villain. Like that's how you lead your way to finding him, is you find the wreckage of all these dance parties, basically.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay. All right. We're gonna leave it on dance party because that's fun as shit. I'm definitely down with that for sure. Okay, that's really fun. Loving it. Absolutely enjoying myself over here. A huge thank you to Ewan, our newest patron, for that. Absolutely in love with the concept. Thank you so much for the prompt. And remember that if you want us to build your world, you can send us a prompt by going to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff if you'd like. We're also on Twitter at Let's World Build. If you want to come and talk with us more directly, go ahead and do so by joining our Discord, where you can talk to us about world building, about Palimpsest, about really whatever you want. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always go to our Patreon and give us money. And in return, you'll get access to sweet patron-only goodies like the Aphid Lounge, Too Hot for Broadcast, and our patron-only Discord area. And with that, that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.